Before you hear my story, I need you to know this isn't easy for me to tell. For years, I believed what he said was love, but love shouldn't hurt like that. If you've ever trusted the wrong person, if you've ever hidden your pain behind silence, stay. Because what I'm about to share might be the voice you've been waiting to hear. And if my truth touches yours, subscribe, so no one ever feels alone in their story again. It was raining that night. The kind of rain that doesn't wash anything clean, it just makes everything colder, heavier, harder to breathe. I remember the smell of wet wood seeping through the cracks of my small room, the ticking sound of the clock stuck at 17 a.m., and the slow creak of the door opening. He stood there, his shadow swallowing the pale light from the hallway. He said my name softly, like it was something fragile. "It's okay," he whispered. "This is love." My body froze, my heart hammering against my ribs as if trying to escape. I didn't understand what he meant. How could love feel like fear? Like I was about to disappear. His hands trembled, but not from hesitation, from desire wrapped in deception. That was the moment my childhood ended, silently, with no witnesses. Only the rain saw it happen. And even now, decades later, I still hear it, the rain, the clock, the whisper that rewrote my life. I didn't tell anyone for years. How could I? He was family. He was trusted. In our house, love was a currency and silence was the price. Every morning, I'd sit at the breakfast table pretending nothing happened. The smell of coffee mixed with guilt. The sound of laughter cut through my stomach like glass. I learned to act, to smile, to survive. And when he looked at me, I'd lower my eyes, hoping he couldn't see the truth screaming behind them. My mother used to say, "Family is everything." I used to believe that. Until family became the reason I couldn't sleep, the reason I avoided mirrors, the reason I forgot what it felt like to be safe. Years passed. I grew older, quieter, harder. I buried that night so deep that even I pretended it wasn't real. I poured myself into studying, working, escaping. By 17, I'd earned a scholarship to leave that house. I thought distance would heal me. I was wrong. The world outside didn't know the language of my silence. Every kind gesture felt suspicious. Every smile felt like a trap. I dated once a boy named Daniel. He was gentle, patient, but every time he touched my hand, I flinched. I wanted to love him, but my body remembered what my mind tried to forget. "You're safe with me," he'd say, but I wasn't. I never was. Because love, for me, had come disguised as a monster. And then one day, the lie cracked. It was during a family dinner years later. He was there, older now, pretending to be the same caring man everyone admired. He raised his glass for a toast, and something inside me snapped. I excused myself, ran to the bathroom, and looked at my reflection. I didn't recognize her, the girl staring back at me, pale, trembling, angry. That night, I decided to speak. Not to the world, not yet, but to myself. I whispered it out loud. "He hurt me." It sounded small, almost like a confession, but it was the first truth I'd said in years. When I finally told my mother, she went silent for a long moment. Then she said, "You must have misunderstood." The words hit harder than any blow. I realized then that some people would rather live inside a lie than face the shame of truth. She begged me not to ruin the family, not to destroy his reputation. That was her phrase, her plea, but I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I told her I wasn't the one who destroyed anything he did. That night, I packed my things and left, not just the house, but the version of myself that believed silence was strength. But healing wasn't linear. It came in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes violent. There were nights I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, feeling his breath again on my skin. I tried therapy. It took months before I could say his name out loud without shaking. My therapist told me that trauma is like a shadow, it follows you until you turn and face it. I didn't believe her at first, but slowly I started to see what she meant. The more I spoke, the smaller the shadow became. Years later, I found out something that shattered me again. He had done it before to another girl, someone younger than I was. That was the moment my pain turned into purpose. I filed a report. People called me a liar, an attention seeker, a destroyer of families. But I didn't care. I had already lost my family the night he entered my room. What more could they take? The investigation dragged on for years, but eventually the truth surfaced. He was convicted. Watching him in handcuffs didn't erase the pain, but it gave me something I never thought I'd feel again: control. And now, when I look back, I realize the saddest part wasn't what he did, it was how easily everyone pretended not to see. How silence becomes tradition. How shame becomes inheritance. But I broke that chain. And if you're listening to this, maybe you can too. Because love should never feel like fear. And if it does, it's not love. It's the beginning of a nightmare you don't deserve to live. For years after that night, my life became a silent negotiation between survival and self-erasure. I learned to walk through rooms without making a sound, to breathe quietly, to exist just enough not to disappear completely. I kept telling myself that if I stayed small, invisible, maybe I'd be safe. But the truth was, my silence only made me easier to control. My mother avoided my eyes, my father kept busy, and he pretended nothing had ever happened. Every Sunday, we'd sit at the same table, pretending to be a family, while I sat across from the man who had stolen my voice. The clinking of forks against plates became a ritual of denial. I used to stare at the steam rising from my food, wondering if the heat could somehow burn away the memories that clung to my skin like ash. I was 14, but inside, I felt like a ghost. By the time I turned 16, I had mastered the art of obedience. I did everything expected of me, top of my class, polite, quiet, always smiling. My mother called me the perfect daughter. What she didn't know was that every yes, Mom, was a lie I told to keep from shattering. I'd hear them whisper about how lucky I was to have such a caring uncle. Sometimes I'd catch his reflection in the window, smiling at me like he still owned that part of me I was trying to reclaim. I remember once, he gave me a birthday gift, a silver necklace with a tiny heart pendant. My hands trembled as I accepted it. The others thought it was sweet. But to me, it felt like a chain disguised as love. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled. When I was 18, I got into a university in another city. That letter felt like oxygen after years of drowning. I left home with a suitcase full of clothes and a heart full of rot I didn't yet understand. The first months were hard. Freedom didn't feel like freedom, it felt like falling. I couldn't trust anyone, not even myself. I'd walk through crowded streets and still feel his shadow brushing against me. I started working nights at a small diner near campus, scrubbing tables until my hands ached. Every coin I earned was a tiny rebellion, proof that I was building a life without him. But even then, when customers smiled, I'd tense up. When a man's voice rose behind me, my body would react before my mind could catch up. Trauma has a way of teaching your body to flinch at kindness. I remember one night vividly. It was winter, the wind howling through the gaps in the diner's old windows. My co-worker, Clara, noticed me staring blankly at the counter and said, "You okay?" I wanted to tell her everything, to let it all spill out right there, between the smell of burnt coffee and the hum of the refrigerator. But I didn't. I just nodded. Because even after all those years, I was still trapped in the prison he built inside me. Still following the unspoken rule he'd planted that night: don't tell anyone. And I hated how well I obeyed. Years passed like that, half living, half remembering. I went through relationships like bandages, each one covering a wound I refused to look at. I told myself I was fine, that what happened was in the past, but the past doesn't stay buried when it's still bleeding. Then came the letter from home. My mother was sick, stage 3. I hadn't spoken to her in years, but when I read her trembling handwriting asking me to come back, my chest tightened. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to stay far from that house where everything began. But another part, the one that still longed for her love, packed a bag and returned. When I walked into that house, everything smelled the same. The same curtains, the same clock ticking too loudly, the same creaky floorboards that knew every step I ever took. And he was there. Older, greyer, smiling like the years hadn't stained him. My mother hugged me weakly and whispered, "He's been helping me." I wanted to vomit. Helping her. The irony was unbearable. That night, I sat beside her bed, and she took my hand. "He regrets everything," she said softly, her voice shaking. I froze. She knew. She had always known. But instead of protecting me, she had chosen peace over truth. My heart broke in a way I didn't think it could anymore. I stayed for weeks, taking care of her, pretending again. He'd pass by the door sometimes, his presence heavy, familiar, poisonous. One night, he came close and whispered, "We both made mistakes." I looked him in the eyes for the first time in years and said, "Only one of us did." For a moment, I saw fear flash across his face. That night, I realized something. He no longer had power over me. The years of silence he'd fed on were gone. And though my mother's illness eventually took her, she died still pretending everything was fine. I didn't cry at her funeral. I couldn't. I was too busy mourning the mother I'd never really had. But something inside me shifted after that. I started writing letters, journals, memories I'd kept buried. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about release. The words poured out of me like poison leaving a wound. Every sentence felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving, I was speaking. It happened on a Sunday morning, the day she called me into her room for what would become the most unbearable request of my life. The curtains were half drawn, sunlight spilling weakly across her frail face. She looked smaller than I remembered, as if the sickness had been feeding on her guilt as much as her body. I pulled a chair close, and before I could say a word, she reached for my hand. "He's all I have left," she whispered, her eyes glassy with tears. For a second, I didn't understand. Then she said the impossible thing. "Please, forgive him. Promise me you'll take care of him when I'm gone." The words hung in the air like smoke, toxic and impossible to breathe. My throat burned. Forgive him? Take care of the man who had taken everything from me. I wanted to scream, to tell her she had no right to ask that. But she kept squeezing my hand, crying, saying, "You don't understand, he's changed." I wanted to tell her that monsters don't change, they just learn to hide better. But she was dying. And part of me, the daughter still desperate for her love, couldn't walk away. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by the window, the same one I used to stare out of as a child, counting the stars to drown out the sounds of footsteps in the dark. My reflection stared back at me, a woman built from broken promises. I kept hearing her words echoing inside my skull. Take care of him. How could I? Forgiveness wasn't healing, it was a wound dressed up as virtue. But the guilt she left behind was heavy. And when she passed away 2 weeks later, her last words to me were, "Be kind, please." The day she died, something inside me fractured again. I felt hollow, like my body was still alive, but my soul had turned to dust. After the funeral, he approached me outside the church. He looked older, his eyes tired, voice trembling. "She loved you more than anything," he said. I didn't answer. Then he added, "She wanted us to start over, us." The word made my stomach twist. I walked away, but he followed. "You think I don't regret it," he said. I turned to him, the wind catching the bitterness in my voice. "Regret isn't redemption," I said. "You don't get to rewrite the story you destroyed." He stared at me, silent, before muttering, "You'll never move on if you keep hating me." That sentence stayed with me for days. Because part of me wondered, was he right? Was my hatred keeping me trapped? Or was it the only thing keeping me alive? Weeks later, I received a letter from his lawyer. My mother had left part of her estate in both our names. The house. The same house where everything began. I didn't want it, didn't even want to set foot in it again. But to settle things legally, I had to. When I arrived, the air inside felt thick, like the walls were still holding secrets. He was there, sitting in the same armchair where he used to read me stories as a child. He looked at me and said, "I want you to have everything. I don't deserve it." I didn't know whether to believe him or see it as another manipulation. Then he handed me an old photograph of me as a little girl, sitting on his shoulders, smiling. "You were always my favorite," he said softly. I wanted to rip the photo apart, but my hands froze. The image wasn't evil, it was innocence before it was stolen. I took it, not for him, but as proof of what he destroyed. As the days passed, I started finding things, old letters my mother had hidden. In one of them, she wrote, "I know what he did, but if I lose him, I lose everything." That line broke me. It wasn't just him who betrayed me, it was her too. She had chosen reputation over truth, comfort over justice. The realization burned hotter than any rage I'd felt before. And that's when something inside me shifted again. Forgiveness wasn't the answer, but neither was carrying their sins any longer. I decided that the only way to truly be free was to let go, not of justice, but of the need to make them understand, because they never would. The day I sold the house, I walked through every room one last time. The hallway still smelled like dust and old perfume. The floor creaked in the same places. I stood in front of that door, the one where it all began. I opened it. The room was smaller now, empty, stripped of everything except the echoes of that night. I stood there and whispered, "You don't owe me any more." For the first time, I believed it. I closed the door, locked it, and left the key on the table. As I stepped outside, the wind carried away the last of the dust. I didn't look back. It was months after selling the house when the phone call came, a voice I hadn't heard in over a decade. "You don't know me," the woman said, her tone trembling. "But I think we share the same nightmare." I froze. Her name was Helena. She said she'd grown up in the same neighborhood, that she used to visit that house when she was little. She hesitated before saying it. "He hurt me too." My stomach dropped. The room spun. I gripped the edge of the table as her words poured out, each one slicing through the thin layer of calm I'd built over the years. She was 11 when it happened. He'd told her the same thing he told me. It's love. My heart raced as if my body already knew what my mind was refusing to process. This wasn't just my story. This was a pattern, a legacy of silence that stretched beyond the walls of our home. After that call, I couldn't sleep. I went through every memory, every look, every whisper that had ever made me feel small. And then I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years, a conversation between my mother and a neighbor when I was still a child. I'd overheard her saying, "Children imagine things. It's better not to make a scene." The pieces began to fit together. My mother had known about Helena. She had known it wasn't just me. That was the real betrayal, not just her silence, but her decision to protect him even when other children were at risk. I felt sick. I wanted to dig her out of her grave and demand answers she never had the courage to give. But what do you do when the people you love most become the architects of your pain? Driven by something between fury and purpose, I started digging. I found an old box in storage, legal papers, letters, hospital records. Among them was a police report dated 1989, a name I didn't recognize. Another girl. Another life broken by the same hands. The report had been dismissed due to lack of evidence. My mother's signature appeared at the bottom as a character witness for him. My breath caught in my throat. She hadn't just covered for him, she had defended him. It felt like my entire history had been rewritten in lies. Every memory of her kindness now felt like manipulation, every lullaby a silencing song. I thought I'd already lost everything, but realizing the depth of her deception made me feel orphaned all over again. I met Helena in person a week later at a small cafe near the coast. She was older than me by a few years, but when we talked, it felt like we were both still that same terrified child, frozen in time. We shared stories that mirrored each other too perfectly to be coincidence, the same phrases, the same promises, the same cycle of fear and guilt. He told me if I told anyone, no one would believe me, she said, her voice cracking. I nodded. I knew that line by heart. Then she showed me something that made my blood run cold, a photograph of her and my mother together at a church charity event years after her assault. They were smiling. My mother had known her, had comforted her, and still chose to protect him. That was the moment everything shattered for good. If you're still here, thank you. This part still breaks me every time I say it out loud. I wanted to scream, but fear kept me quiet for so long. Don't look away now, because from this moment on, everything changes. And if you believe that every silenced voice deserves to be heard, subscribe and stand with me in the light. I spent the next few days in a haze, unable to eat or think. My therapist once told me that truth can be both poison and medicine. It kills you before it sets you free. I understood that now. I decided to visit the cemetery, to stand before my mother's grave and speak the words I'd never dared to say. You knew, I whispered, my voice shaking. You knew, and you let it happen again. The wind howled, scattering dry leaves across the stone. For a moment, I almost expected her to answer, to apologize, to say she was scared or trapped or manipulated. But the silence that followed was the final proof of everything I needed to know. Some wounds aren't accidents, they're choices made in fear and cowardice. After that, I called Helena again. We need to do something, I said. We need to make sure no one else suffers because of him. Together, we gathered evidence, old letters, testimonies, photographs. I contacted a journalist, someone brave enough to tell stories people didn't want to hear. When the article came out, it spread fast. His face, once respected and admired, was now the symbol of hidden horror. People started coming forward, 3, then 5, then 7. I remember reading each message, each confession, and realizing how many lives he had shattered while the world looked away. It was no longer just about my pain, it was about a truth that had been buried for decades. He was arrested again. This time, there was no protection, no mother to defend him, no reputation to hide behind. Watching the police take him felt surreal. The world didn't end. The sky didn't fall. He was just a man, a weak, pathetic man stripped of his power. For the first time in my life, I felt something close to peace. But peace isn't the same as closure. Closure is a myth for people who think justice erases scars. It doesn't. The scars remain, they just stop bleeding. It was 3 months after his arrest when I received a letter in the mail with no return address. The handwriting was shaky but familiar, it was my mother's. My heart stopped for a moment. She'd been gone for almost a year, and yet there it was, her voice resurrected in ink. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the envelope as if it might bite. When I finally opened it, a small photograph slipped out, first me, at around 6 years old, sitting on her lap. We were both smiling, but behind her eyes, now that I looked closer, there was something, fear, maybe guilt, maybe both. The letter was dated 3 days before she died. If you're reading this, she had written, it means I didn't have the courage to say this out loud. But you deserve to know the truth. My hands shook as I turned the page. She confessed that he hadn't just been her brother-in-law, he'd been her first love, long before she met my father. She wrote that when she found out what he had done to me, she wanted to end it all. But he threatened her, said he'd tell everyone about their past, that he'd destroy her, destroy us. I was weak, she wrote. And I'm sorry. I chose silence because I thought it would protect you, but it only protected him. I read that letter over and over until the words lost meaning. The revelation hit me like a hurricane, tearing through everything I'd rebuilt. Suddenly, her actions made sense, the denial, the pleas, the loyalty that had always felt unnatural. She wasn't just complicit, she was bound by a secret too ugly to expose. I wanted to hate her, and I did. But I also understood her in a way that made me sick. She had been his victim too long before I was born. The realization crawled through me, leaving a trail of fire. The man who had destroyed my childhood had destroyed hers first. It was generational, a chain of control passed down like a curse. And she, instead of breaking it, handed it to me wrapped in silence. That night, I drove to the coast, the same place I used to go when I couldn't breathe. The waves crashed violently against the rocks, each one sounding like a heartbeat I didn't want to hear. I screamed until my throat burned, screamed for her, for me, for every woman who had ever been told to forgive what should never be forgiven. I threw the letter into the wind, but it didn't go far. It landed in the water, sinking slowly, taking her confession with it. Watching it disappear, I realized something. Forgiveness wasn't a gift to the person who hurt you, it was a weapon you could turn into freedom. But to forgive, I had to understand, and to understand, I had to see her not as a mother, not as a betrayer, but as another broken soul who never escaped the same monster. The next day, I went to the prison. I didn't go to see him, I went for me. The guard led me through cold corridors that smelled of metal and bleach, the sound of keys echoing like ghosts. When he appeared behind the glass, I almost didn't recognize him. His hair was thin, his face hollow, his arrogance gone. For a second, I felt nothing, then everything. He smiled weakly and said, "I knew you'd come." I looked straight into his eyes and said, "You are wrong." He tried to speak again, but I cut him off. "You don't get to live rent-free in my head anymore. You don't get my silence, my fear, or my forgiveness." His face twisted, searching for control that no longer existed. I stood up and walked away. That was the last time I saw him. In the weeks that followed, something inside me began to shift. I started volunteering at a support center for survivors. At first, it was hard. Listening to their stories felt like reliving mine. But slowly, I began to see how pain could transform into connection, how brokenness could become strength. One girl, barely 16, came to me trembling, unable to say what had happened. I looked at her and said, "You don't have to say it yet. Just breathe. You're safe now." And in her tears, I saw a reflection of the girl I used to be, the one no one ever told was safe. That day, I realized something deeper than revenge, deeper than justice. Healing isn't about forgetting, it's about reclaiming the story so it stops owning you. Months later, I received news that he'd died in his cell. Heart failure, they said. No fanfare, no redemption arc, no final confrontation, just silence. The same silence he'd once forced upon me. I thought I'd feel joy, relief, something. But I felt nothing, just a strange kind of stillness, as if a long, ugly chapter had finally reached its last period. I drove back to that coastal cliff one last time, watched the sunset burn through the sky, and whispered, "It's over." But I knew it wasn't really over. The past doesn't vanish, it transforms. It becomes a compass pointing to who you refuse to become. The morning after his death, I woke up before sunrise. For the first time in years, there was no weight pressing against my chest, no shadow waiting at the edge of my thoughts. Just silence, but this time, it wasn't suffocating. It was peaceful. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the first light crawl across the city. It felt like the world was finally exhaling with me. I thought about everything, the pain, the lies, the endless nights where I thought I'd never make it out alive. And yet, here I was, breathing, healing, existing not as a survivor of someone else's story, but as the author of my own. That realization changed everything. It wasn't just that he was gone, it was that he no longer lived through me. The version of myself that he tried to destroy had survived every attempt to silence her. And that survival, that persistence, was louder than any scream I'd ever held inside. I started writing again, not letters or confessions this time, but stories. Stories of women who broke free, of children who grew into warriors, of silence turned into song. Every word was a piece of my resurrection. I wrote for the girl I once was, for the mother I lost to fear, and for every person still trapped in the dark. Because if my voice could reach even one of them, maybe they'd know they weren't alone. I called the series Echoes of the Unspoken. It became something bigger than me. People started sharing their own stories, messages from strangers saying, "Your words gave me courage." I realized then that healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in the collective heartbeat of those who dare to tell the truth. There are nights when I still wake up in a cold sweat, memories flickering like lightning through my mind. But instead of running from them, I listen. Because now I understand they're not haunting me, they're reminding me that I made it out, that I am more than what happened. Sometimes I visit the sea again, the same cliffs where I once screamed his name into the wind. Now I stand there quietly, letting the salt air sting my face, feeling the waves crash below like the pulse of something eternal. That place no longer feels like an escape, it feels like a return. To myself. To the version of me that deserved love, safety, and truth all along. If you're listening to this, maybe you've carried a silence too heavy to speak. Maybe you were told to forget, to forgive, to move on before you were ready. I want you to know this. You owe nothing to the ones who broke you. Your pain isn't shame, it's proof that you survived. And survival, no matter how quiet, is an act of defiance. Don't let anyone convince you that your story is too dark to be told. The truth is what frees you, even when it burns. Especially when it burns. Because in that fire, you find who you really are. Sometimes I wonder what she'd say my mother if she could see me now. Maybe she'd finally understand what I tried to become. Or maybe she already knew, deep down, that one of us had to break the cycle. I like to believe that somewhere she found peace too. Not forgiveness, not absolution, just peace. The kind that comes when the lies finally stop echoing. The kind that comes when the silence belongs to you again. And so I live, not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as someone reborn from the ashes of everything meant to destroy her. I live for every version of myself that ever wanted to give up. For every girl who still believes love should never hurt. And when the rain falls at night, I don't hear his footsteps anymore. I hear mine walking forward, steady and unafraid, because the nightmare ended the moment I decided to speak. And my voice will never be silent again. The silence that followed his death wasn't peace, it was something colder, deeper, like standing in the middle of an empty church after the candles have burned out. For days, I wandered through my apartment as if I were haunting it, touching objects that suddenly felt meaningless. The coffee cup, the mirror, the old photo of me smiling a smile I no longer recognized. It's strange how grief doesn't always come for those we love. Sometimes it comes for the pieces of ourselves that we buried alongside them. He was gone, yes, but so was the version of me that had lived only to fight him. And when the battle ended, I didn't know who I was without the war. The walls seemed to hum with the ghosts of my own memories, whispering the question I couldn't answer, what now? At night, I'd hear the rain again, the same rhythm that once filled my childhood room. It didn't scare me anymore, but it didn't comfort me either. It was just there, steady, eternal, reminding me that time doesn't heal, it just erodes everything until only truth remains. I started dreaming of the house again. In my dreams, I was walking through it, barefoot, every door opening on its own. The air was heavy with the smell of dust and roses. When I reached my old room, I'd find the little girl version of myself sitting on the bed, staring at me. She never spoke. She just looked at me, waiting. And every time, I'd wake up before I could tell her it was over. Because deep down, I knew it never truly ends. Trauma doesn't die, it transforms into echoes waiting in the corners of quiet rooms. One evening, I returned to the coast. The wind was cruel, slicing through my coat, carrying salt and rain. The ocean looked endless, black, alive. I stood at the edge of the cliff where I'd once thrown her letter into the waves, and for the first time, I didn't cry. I simply closed my eyes and listened to the water, to the wind, to the heartbeat I'd learned to reclaim. I whispered to the sea, not for forgiveness, but for understanding. Take what's left of it, I said softly. All the fear, all the anger, all the names I've swallowed, the ocean roared back, swallowing my voice whole. And in that moment, I understood it wasn't answering me. It was keeping my secret, the same way it kept my mother's, my child's selves, every unspoken truth that never found a home. When I returned to the city, I stopped writing for a while. The words felt too small for what I carried. Instead, I painted. Dark skies, faceless figures, doorways leading to nowhere. Each stroke felt like a wound opening, and yet, somehow, it bled beauty. My apartment became a gallery of grief canvases lined against the walls, silent witnesses to everything I could never say aloud. People started asking to buy them, but I refused. They weren't art. They were confession. They were proof. They were mine. Sometimes I walk past strangers and wonder if they can see it, the weight, the darkness that clings even after healing. I wonder if they feel it too. Some nights I still light a candle by the window, not for him, but for every soul that never made it out of their own silence. The flame flickers, small but stubborn, like a pulse that refuses to stop. Maybe that's all healing really is, not light, not forgiveness, just persistence. The quiet decision to keep breathing, even when it still hurts too. I don't dream of revenge anymore, or even justice. I dream of silence. Not the kind he gave me, heavy and forced, but the kind I've built myself, a silence that belongs to me, shaped by my own hands. One where the rain no longer sounds like footsteps, where the shadows don't carry names. I've learned that some stories don't need happy endings. Some just need to be told, completely, honestly, until they stop festering in the dark. And maybe that's what I've done, turned my wound into words, my fear into sound, my silence into something that finally speaks. So if one day you find yourself standing in the rain, listening to the echoes of something you can't name, listen closer. It might not be pain you're hearing. It might be survival, whispering that you made it through. And even if no one else ever understands what that cost, you'll know. You'll know that you walked through hell and came back breathing. And that, in itself, is the closest thing to peace this world will ever give. The night I decided to confront him was colder than any winter I'd ever known, though the calendar said it was spring. I remember standing at the threshold of his house, yes, his house, the same one that had swallowed my childhood whole, and feeling my hands tremble, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what I was about to do. The old porch light buzzed weakly, casting yellow scars across the wooden door. For a second, I thought about turning back. But then I saw my reflection in the window, a woman, older, marked by pain, but still standing, and I realized that this wasn't about him anymore. It was about taking back the pieces of me he had stolen. I knocked. The sound echoed through the house like a gunshot. When he opened the door, time fractured. He looked smaller, weaker, like a man haunted by his own shadow. His voice cracked when he said my name, as if he'd been rehearsing it in the dark for years. "You came back," he whispered. I nodded, feeling the air thicken between us. "I came to end this." He tried to smile, that same hollow grin that once fooled everyone. But it didn't work anymore. I could see through him now, every word, every lie, every manipulation he'd ever used to twist love into obedience. "I was young," he murmured, searching for pity. I didn't know better, my chest tightened with rage. "You knew enough to hide it," I said. The silence that followed was sharp enough to bleed. He tried to reach out, but I stepped back. For the first time in my life, I didn't flinch. "You took everything," I told him, my voice steady, even as my heart roared inside my chest. "My sleep, my trust, my childhood. And you called it love." His eyes filled with tears, but I couldn't tell if they were for me or for himself. "I thought you forgave me," he said. I laughed, a sound so unfamiliar it startled even me. "Forgiveness isn't yours to demand. It's something I give to myself, not to the one who broke me. The words burned, but they felt pure. True, for the first time, I saw his fear, the same fear he once planted in me. It was small, pitiful, and I realized then that he wasn't a monster. He was just a man, a weak one, and I would no longer be his victim. I left without looking back. The air outside hit my face like freedom, cold, clean, alive. I walked until the sun began to rise, its pale light crawling across the horizon like a promise. Every step felt like shedding an old skin, leaving behind the whispers, the locked doors, the guilt that never belonged to me. By the time I reached the main road, I was crying, but they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of release. Years of silence collapsing into one long, shattering exhale. The world looked different in that moment, not kinder, but clearer. And maybe that was enough. When I reached home, I sat by the window for hours, watching the light change. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who believed that love and pain were the same thing. I wanted to tell her she was wrong. That love doesn't silence, it saves. That real love never hides behind closed doors. But she was gone, buried beneath all the years I'd spent surviving. Still, I hoped that somewhere, in some quiet corner of my heart, she heard me whisper, "We're free now." As the sun dipped below the city skyline, I realized I didn't need justice to move on. I didn't need revenge or closure or even an apology. What I needed was space, the kind of silence that didn't hurt anymore. The kind that hummed with possibility. The kind that felt like peace. And as I sat there, the city lights flickering like constellations reborn, I knew the nightmare had ended. Not with an apology, not with punishment, but with me, walking away and never turning back. Years passed before I could finally say the word home without feeling the taste of blood behind it. I moved to a small town by the sea, a place where no one knew my name, where the sound of the waves could drown out what I still carried inside. My apartment was small, with pale walls and a single window facing the ocean. Every morning, I would open it wide, letting the salt air fill my lungs, forcing myself to breathe deeply, to remember that my body was no longer a prison. The nights were still hard. Sometimes the wind would move through the cracks, making the floorboards creak like footsteps, and for a second, I'd feel myself freeze, waiting for a voice that would never come again. But then I'd look outside, see the horizon, and whisper, "Not this time." It became a ritual, a promise, a reclamation of power, one breath at a time. I started teaching art classes to children. At first, I didn't think I could handle it. Too many faces, too much innocence. But then I met Clara, a quiet girl who never spoke above a whisper. She reminded me of myself at that age, always watching, always listening, always holding something back. One afternoon, as she drew, I noticed the way her hands trembled slightly, the way her eyes darted toward the door every time it opened. I knelt beside her and said softly, "You can draw anything you want here. No one will judge you." She looked at me for a long time, and then she drew a small locked door with light shining underneath it. My throat tightened, but I smiled. "It's beautiful," I told her. And it was. Because I knew that for her, that door wasn't just a drawing. It was a beginning, the same way my story had begun again the day I walked away. There's a kind of strength that comes from surviving what should have destroyed you. It's not loud, not visible. It's quiet, steady, like the tide that keeps coming back no matter how many times it's pulled away. People call it resilience, but it's more than that. It's transformation. Every scar becomes a line of poetry, every wound a map back to yourself. I used to hate the mirror. Now I look at it and see someone who made it out. Not untouched, not unbroken, but whole in a different way. Wholeness doesn't mean perfection. It means ownership. It means saying, "This happened, and I am still here." Sometimes when the sky turns orange at dusk, I think of him not with love, not with hatred, but with a strange, detached pity. He'll never know what freedom feels like. He'll never understand the strength that comes from forgiveness, not of him, but of myself. I don't wish him pain. Pain taught me enough. I wish him awareness, the kind that burns through the lies we tell ourselves to sleep at night. Because awareness, I've learned, is the only kind of justice that really lasts. Now, when I walk by the ocean, I no longer fear the darkness beneath the waves. I know that even the deepest waters can reflect light. I pick up shells sometimes, smooth and broken at once, and think this is what healing looks like. You don't erase the past. You carry it differently. You make peace with the weight of it. And maybe, just maybe, that's what survival really is, learning to live with what once threatened to destroy you and still finding beauty in the ruin. The day I returned to that house, I felt something I never expected: indifference. The streets were the same, cracked and worn, but the weight of memory no longer pressed against my shoulders. I stood in front of the door, tracing the faded paint with my fingers, remembering the nights I had cowered inside, the shadows that once seemed endless. For a moment, I closed my eyes and imagined the girl I once was standing beside me, small, terrified, trembling. And then I whispered, "We're free now." The words were quiet, almost swallowed by the wind, but they carried the force of a lifetime. The house no longer had power over me. Its walls, once suffocating, now felt like nothing more than empty wood and plaster, hollow and incapable of holding fear. I walked through the yard, overgrown with weeds, feeling the crunch of dead leaves beneath my boots. The windows were dark, the air still. I pressed my hand to the glass of my old bedroom window, seeing nothing but dust and light. I remembered every whisper, every shadow, every lie that had once trapped me in that space. And yet I felt no anger, no rage. Just a profound sense of reclamation. The fear I had carried for decades had dissolved, replaced with clarity. I realized that the house had never been haunted by ghosts, it had been haunted by memory, and memory, I now understood, only had the power we give it. I turned away from the door for the last time. The sunlight touched my face, warm, insistent, like the life I had been denied for so long. My steps felt lighter, as if each one carried away the remnants of my pain. I paused at the sidewalk, looking back once, not out of longing, but to witness the past for what it truly was, a place I had survived. I whispered to the wind, "You don't own me," and as I walked down the street, the sound of my own footsteps mingled with the distant hum of the city. I felt whole. Not healed, not unscarred, but alive, free. And for the first time in my life, I believed that life belonged to me, fully, entirely, without fear or shadow. I knew I could never undo the years I lost, nor erase the pain he inflicted, nor bring back the innocence that was stolen. But I could live beyond it, and that choice, that stubborn, unyielding choice, was my victory. In the distance, the house faded from view, a relic of the past, no longer part of my present. The air smelled of rain, salt, and possibility, and in that moment, I understood something I had sought for so long. Freedom isn't a place, a person, or even justice. Freedom is the quiet knowledge that you survived, that you endured, that your voice matters, that, no matter the darkness, you can walk into the light and finally claim your story as your own. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long, golden streaks across the street, I felt a peace that no years of silence, no shadowed memories, no monsters in human form could ever take from me. I took a deep breath, lifted my chin, and let the wind carry the last whispers of my past away. The nightmare had ended. The girl who once trembled behind locked doors had finally stepped into her life, unafraid, unashamed, and entirely, gloriously free.